Welcome to No Compromises, a peek into the mind of two old web devs who have seen some things. This is Joel.
And this is Aaron.
Many Laravel developers write tests as part of their software development workflow. And I do the same. I like that. Regardless of when you write the test, if it's before or after the code, doesn't matter. However, one thing we don't like is flaky tests. You run a test today, it passes. You run a test tomorrow, it fails. I've run into that. And one of the things I've learned that leads to flaky tests is unnecessary randomization. And I came to this enlightenment, if you will, through the advice of others, such as Aaron. Aaron, do you recall these events?
I do. I remember you running a test about 40 times at passing and then one time failing. And then, hey, can we take a look? And every time we look at it together, it works. And get off the Zoom call and then it's not working again.
Yes.
Send it out to CI/CD and it fails.
Not good. If the whole point of tests is to build confidence and to make us move faster, this is the opposite. And to be honest, this flakiness is pretty random and doesn't happen a lot. I would say in my case, it happened just little enough that I never really felt a need to go figure it out. It's I'll just run the test again. And then they pass and okay, not a big deal. So, maybe you'd bump into it once a week or something. It wasn't every other time it failed. It was flaky in the flakiest sense of the flakiness that there can be in a test. That's a term. Look it up. It's in Martin Fowler.
No, it made me think of a croissant or something. So flaky.
Ooh, flaky pastry. Very good. So let's dig in a little bit as to why, because randomization on the surface is a necessary thing in tests. Let's take it back a step. So where randomization often comes into play is in the factories. So we use factories to make it easier to build up the state of our application that we're trying to test. And we're sort of led down this path of randomization by the fact that it's really easy. In fact, I think the docs even show here's how you use Faker in your factories, because if you're hard coding a name in a user object, you don't want all your users to have the same name. So you have to have some randomization. But I guess the thing to balance is when to have randomization. When is it useful? And when might it lead to some of these flaky tests?
Well, actually, that's a good question, because I have, unsurprisingly, very strong opinions about that.
Never.
So basically, here's what I do when I look at whether something should be random or not. Is this piece of data used to make a decision in my product? If it is, I don't want it to be random, because I want the decisions to always flow in the same direction for my test when I'm testing that decision. Whereas if it's something that, where it's something that doesn't affect my business logic, I will go and make it random. So I can give you some examples, right?
Yeah. That'd be
helpful. Let's just say you have a user object, and in your application, it has a first and last name.
Okay.
Maybe an email address, and it also has a state. And your product figures out taxes for a shopping cart. Now, things that maybe don't matter so much are the first and last name. And so those could be random. This isn't just the application for John Smith. It can be any of these names that you make up, right? So you might use Faker for that. Give me a first name, a last name. Just kind of nice to have some random data to see how things might, react. An area where you might want to start considering whether this should be random would be the email address. It might be random, but it might have to be forced to be unique. So that's kind of that middle case.
Yep.
And one of the cases where I would think you wouldn't want to make it random would be the state, because perhaps each state and each municipality has different taxes, right? So we're going to say we're always going to assign it to a known state. Let's just say Wisconsin, because we know that if we check out something and it's always Wisconsin, the tax rate's always going to be the same. Whereas if we did that as a random state, It might pick Wisconsin with a 5% tax rate. It might pick Illinois with a 5% tax rate. It might pick California with a 9% tax rate on one of those tests. And suddenly your calculation just isn't correct.
Mm. So that I like that example because it makes it a bit more concrete. Let me pose a scenario though. What if currently my app has no logic based on state? Is this the kind of thing where you might even try to predict the future a little bit and be like, I'm not doing this now, but this is a thing I've done enough in the past, like where state impacts logic, that I just won't randomize that? Or do you randomize it until it's a problem? Like how do you make that
Yeah,
decision?
that is a tough question. It's a good question too, because we don't want to do pre-optimization. We don't want to do things, Yagni, you ain't going to need it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are things you can kind of, like you said, if you've done enough and you understand the business maybe you're working with, you can have an idea. So there are a couple like little tips too that I've seen that kind of make this a little better and a little bit easier, which would be the way you refer to these items, how you name them, right?
Okay.
So for example, if you're going to name something, it doesn't matter what business you're in, but if you're going to name it something code, so, like a standard code or a tax code or a country code or something that says code, that just screams to me that's a business's way of measuring the differences in something. They need code to be able to say there's a different process here. And so, you might not have code around that or per se, decisions around that, but that's a good one that you might know that maybe I shouldn't randomize that.
Okay.
I would say don't go crazy, like trying to figure out every single possible thing you might do logic on. But there are some middle grounds where you're like, chances are this means something.
Yeah. Yeah. Roles was another one that we've talked about where it's even if it's like role ID or something like that, don't randomize that. That's gonna cause you a world of hurt. That's where states are important. We have that ability to define states against our factories and just be super explicit. Like, maybe the default user has a role of whatever makes it like a normal user. And if you have an admin or a manager or something like that, just create additional states for that to track that. And so you can pull in the right thing in your test. And it makes your tests read nicer too.
Right. That's a good idea.
Another place I've seen flaky tests bite me, and just to point out something too, sometimes a flaky test goes the other direction. So something that normally passes will occasionally fail. That's kind of what we normally think of. But there's this other weird flaky test where something's passing all along and it kind of shouldn't have been. And then you make a change in your logic and it starts failing. And you realize your test was actually a false positive. It was passing for the wrong reason. And so what are some scenarios where you've seen that, and how do you guard against those other types of flaky tests?
Sure. So one of the very common places where you can see that is if you're going to retrieve something and maybe you want to test the order of it or you want to test some filtering, right? So you go and use a factory and you create one object and now your database contains one item, and then you retrieve all of them and you say, yep, it's in the proper order. Well, of course, because there's only one of them. Or if you create them in the same order that you're going to sort them.
Yeah.
So I create 3 in a row with incrementing IDs, and then I say, order this by date created. Well, those are going to be always the same order. So I might consider creating them in a different order, changing up the dates or something like that, so that when I retrieve my data, I can actually tell it's been sorted. Okay. Same thing when you do a filter. So you say, give me all of the models from state equals Wisconsin, but you only made models where state is Wisconsin, but it's going to only be all those. And so, you could remove that filtering logic and the test would still pass.
Right.
So that's why when we've been working together on some of our projects, you'll see I'll set up not only the data I know I want to retrieve and what data, I'll also set up alternate data as well. So where another place that comes in useful is if you have models that are related to like a parent model, and you say, give me all the child models from an endpoint, I'll create maybe 3 or 4 child models so we can test our ordering and our sorting, but I'll also create another 1 or 2 interspersed in that whole setup that belong to a different parent. That way I can make sure that when I retrieve that data, it's ignoring the ones that are not from the parent I want, and it's still sorting it.
Yes, that's definitely a good practice to get into. You don't want to go nuts with it. Like where does it
Right.
end? Like, do I have to create 100 unrelated things? No, just 1 or 2. And like you were talking about, some of the important places to do that: ordering, filtering, things like that, where having an extra thing in your result set would actually should cause the test to fail. And just one tip that I've picked up or sort of fine tuned is when you're creating those extra objects in your test, like you can even name them, like some other user or unrelated data or things like that. So when you're reading the test, you won't scratch your head like, why are we creating these other things that have nothing to do with what we're actually testing? And even like in PHP Storm, it might even be gray, like, ooh, you're not even using this variable, you could just remove it. But if you name it the right thing, then it conveys to the person reading the test, like, oh, this is done for this reason. It's to make sure we don't get extra data.
Yeah, self-documenting code, basically.
Perfect. Love it.
So there seems to be a resurgence in things that were cool in the past, and kind of went the way of the dodo bird. And some of those now are TV shows. There's a bunch of remakes. But I want to think about before the remakes, right?
Okay.
Can you think of any shows that maybe as a kid seemed awesome or great, and now as adults, when you think about it, you're like, what was going on? I can give you some examples.
Okay.
Just to kind of get you on there. First of all, there was that live action Mario Brothers TV show.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember really thinking that was cool. And now when you watch something on YouTube, you're like, what is going on? Or let's be honest, all of the Power Rangers.
Okay.
Just like, what are you guys doing? Even the remake, which was much better, I guess. But it's just, what's going
The
on
movie
here?
you're talking about.
Or shows.
Okay.
Disney's Gargoyles, an animated show where gargoyles came to life and saved a city.
Okay.
Another one I remember watching was Bots Master. It was 5 robots, I think, or 4 robots that somehow lived with a child. And then they combined into a mega robot, and then them and that child saved the city.
Okay.
Can you think of any shows that were maybe you liked when you're little, and now when you look back, you're like, what was going on? Was it just a different time back then?
Yeah, that's part of it. I would also say that I'm probably not the best person to answer this, because there are shows that have been remade where I still like them, even though as an adult, I should know they're cheesy. For example,
Yeah,
MacGyver. Like, I loved that as a kid. and I even watched the new one, and I like it, and it's stupid, and I know it's stupid and it's cheesy, but I still like it. So, boy, let me think harder. I can think of some shows that hold up. Like Sesame Street is
okay,
still solid, man. Like that, my kids watch that now, and we've pulled up some of the old
okay.
ones. That's still solid. Muppets, same sort of thing.
Which is strange to think that when you think about the history of HBO, and now Sesame Street's home is HBO. Like, what's going on?
Yeah. There is an Elmo After Dark show, but it's still clean. It's like a talk show.
Yeah.
A lot of the examples you gave were like cartoons and like clearly kid shows.
Right.
No, I can't think of. I guess I watched only highbrow TV. Like, you probably watched Masterpiece Theater as a kid, like me. And
nope, never did.
Another one that jumped in my head was that show Perfect Strangers. Like, I loved that as a kid. And man, I saw a clip of that the other day, because there was like some funny phrase I was trying to share with my kids that have never seen the show, don't even know the characters. And so I'd found the clip on YouTube. I'm like, wow, this show is pretty bad. And I think a lot of sitcoms from that era, Elf, that one just jumped into my head. I loved that as a kid.
Yep.
And that's almost it's too bad I couldn't watch it now, even like for nostalgia. It really is dumb. So yeah, Elf, but I still love MacGyver.
Do you have your own phantom test that seems to fail 1 out of 100 times?
We can help. Book a free consultation with us on our website, nocompromises.io.